Hello everyone, Jai Hind and welcome to the platform of StudyIQ IS in English. My name is Bhanwar Singh, MX CDA 115th course and qualified civil services in 2012. And I welcome you onto the platform. And if you're watching this session live, please type in the message and let me know that you're watching this session live along with me. And once again, we'll be doing the complete The Hindu analysis and we'll be seeing which all important news articles are there in our today's The Hindu. Now, that is what we'll be going to do. But before that, we'll be seeing from today onwards that which all news are important for your prelims and again, which all important news are there for your mains as well. So that is one of the categorization that we'll be doing and that is one of the change that we'll be implementing from today onwards. So we'll be seeing that which all important news are there when it comes to your prelims focused, all right, and then to your mains focus as well, and that is what we are going to do right from today onwards. All right, so let's move ahead and let's see what are the important codes that you can use for your mains examination. The first code that we have over here is, you can see that it is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is one that is most adaptable to the change. So ultimately this is the change that we are going to do, and this is the quote that is by Charles Darwin. So you must have heard about him. He gave the the survival of the fittest, and ultimately this is quite important quote that I am talking about. Good morning, Reshma. All right, the next quote that is over here is, a nation that compromises the integrity of its systems compromises its own future as well. Now this actually pertains to one of the news that I was going through, or you can say the editorial that is the first of the news that we'll be discussing as well, that relates to the the Gen Z the job opportunities that are there or the employment crisis that is among the job the Gen Z jobs, and ultimately this is quite one of the important code that you can use while you are framing the answers. All right, now let's move to the word of the day that we have for today, and it is indigence, and this is the state of extreme poverty or destitution. So over here this could be it is a synonym with the need, the penury and pauperism as well. So its usages: the economic crisis left thousands on the brink of indigence. So again, this is quite important and ultimately very important, you can say that word of the day that is there. Now coming to the prelims focused or the prelims weighted stories that we have for today is, it is about EGR or the the electronic gold receipts. Now this is quite important because this pertains to economy, and this is where we have the NSE that has launched the EGR or electronic gold receipts, and ultimately this is about the SEBI gold exchange framework 2021 as well. Now there is another news that is about the 131st Constitutional Amendment and the Delimitation Bill. Now this pertains to Article 81, 82 as well, and the freeze on the seats of the Lok Sabha, and even the delimitation that was frozen. The seats that were frozen, that was in 1976 through the 42nd Amendment Act. Then further it was extended in 2021 and 26 as well. Now there is another article that is about Vande Mataram Prevention of Insults Amendment Bill 2026. Now again, this is quite important because it pertains to the amendment of the 1971 Act and even the 150th anniversary of Vande Mataram. Then we have the Skyroot's Vikram 1 launch. Then it connects to science and technology, and this is the first Indian private orbital launch that we are talking about. And even there we have the engine which was 3D printed, and ultimately the complete body is made up of the carbon composite material, and that is why this is quite important. Then we have the Waqf Amendment Act of 2025. Now over here the Kerala board freeze, again there is the article related to this, and it is quite important because ultimately according to the amendment that was made in 2025, there is a non-Muslim member clause that had been added, and over here we have seen the various judgments that were there pertaining to this particular clause in the Allahabad and the Kerala High Court as well. Now there is also a news about E20, where we have the 20% ethanol blended petrol. Now, this is again quite important because ultimately we are talking about the ethanol blended petrol program, where it has advanced 5 years to April 2025, where this E20, it had to be integrated, or you can say it had to be implemented from 2030. But now this had been advanced to 2025. Now, there is the Omicron RF5 sublineage as well. Now, this is the first case that we are talking about in Andhra Pradesh, and again NIV Pune sequencing is quite important when it comes to virology. Now, coming to the next important article that we have today is about the Strait of Hormuz and the second phase of the Iran and US war. Now, over here you can have in your prelims the questions that relates to the geographical location of the complete region, and even about IMO, and also it pertains to the Malacca Singapore Strait also, where there had been a complete comparison that had been laid down. Next, we have the Taj Mahal legal dispute, which is about the ASI 2017 report, and also the notice that had been issued by the Allahabad High Court. Then we have another news that is about embodied AI and the neuromorphic AI as well. Then also about the NMC, or the National Medical Commission, where we have the new medical seats, and ultimately now Karnataka has the highest seats when it comes to the MBBS or the medical seats that are there in the country. Then we have Sir Garfield sobers as well. There is an obituary because ultimately this is when it comes to Sir Garfield. Sir Garfield, so he is or he was the West Indies all-rounder, and ultimately there had been the Test triple century record holder as well. Then comes India UK CETA as well, and Har Ghar Tiranga campaign. Now, these are the important news that actually pertains to your prelims, and these are important for your prelims preparation. Vasundhara, good morning. Alright, now coming to the next, that is the mains focused or the mains weighted stories that we have for today. So these are the important stories that you can find in the Hindu, that we have the Gen Z job crisis according to the PLFS 2023-24. Then we have the India UK CETA as well, delimitation come 131st Amendment standoff. Then we have the Waqf or the UCC, where the cabinet of the Madhya Pradesh, it has accepted or notified the UCC or Uniform Civil Code for Madhya Pradesh as well. Then there is E20 transition, and also the Vikram 1 and the Strait of Hormuz. These are important for your mains. And then we have the another news that is about India-Australia relations, also FNO retail trading losses and the SEBI regulation. Then there is also another news about the child sexual abuse enforcement gaps when it pertains to the Janakpuri and the cyber tip line as well. Alright, then it is about Sonam Wangchuk hunger strike and the student protest, even the river linking, where it is there is the news about the Ken Betwa interlinking project, and even the Bagmati and Budi Gandak interlinking. Then we have the Jammu and Kashmir statehood restoration and embodied AI governance gap. So these are the important news when it pertains to basically these pertains to the the mains framework, where you can have the questions that could be asked from these particular news. Now, coming to the first news that we have for today to discuss, it is the editorial that we are talking about, and this is again about the stark reality of the missing jobs for the India's Gen Z. Now, this is quite important because ultimately this news is important because we talk about the demographic dividend. And ultimately, when it comes to India, we have the large workforce that is there. But again, when it comes to the demographic dividend, so ultimately this is quietly turning into the liability that we are talking about. Alright, so that is why this is quite important, because this pertains to the Gen Z jobs, and according to the recent survey, the PLFS 2023-24, it has found that there is 29.94 crore of the working age Gen Z which are between 15 to 26 years, as compared to 35 crore millennials which are between 27 to 42 years. Now, when it comes to the overall Gen Z employment, so there is 11.9% as compared to the just 2% for the millennials. And ultimately, the urban Gen Z unemployment is right now at 17.1%. Now, this is quite important because among the graduate Gen Z males, you will find that 29% of them, they are unemployed. And among the graduate Gen Z females, there is 36.9% of the unemployment. So this is quite important because this article pertains to the demographic dividend that we talk about, that India has the, the young workforce that is there, or ultimately when it comes to the young workforce, we have the high unemployment rate when it comes to the Gen Z population. All right, now this is quite important because ultimately here you will see that we have only 20.1% of the Gen Z workers, they have the social security cover. And even when it comes to the formal job, so we have only 14.1%, they have the formal job contract as well. So this pertains to the gap between the formal and the informal, the job as well. Then when it comes to the complete participation of the female in the labor force, so over here it is also quite concerning because ultimately you can see that we have only 21.1 to 28% of the urban young women which are there in the labor force. And also when it comes to the domestic, the duties, so there are 27.1% who do only the domestic duties and they are not employed in the formal sector. So again, this is quite concerning when it comes to the complete demographic dividend that we are talking about. And this is quite important because Apex, good morning. Over here, economically, if we go over here, you can say that we have the labor market. But at the same time, this labor market, it cannot absorb the educated youth fast enough. So this is basically where we are talking about the graduate trap, where we have the Gen Z population that is getting graduated, but they are not being absorbed by the labor force or the labor market that is there. And also we have the automation and the AI, which is basically reshaping the entry-level jobs as well. So this is quite pertaining or concerning as well when it comes to the Gen Z population. Then there is the social perspective as well, where we have the gendered burden of the unpaid domestic work. Also, when it comes to the unpaid, domestic work, you can relate it to the recent Supreme Court observation as well. We have discussed that, all right, where the Supreme Court have observed that it should not be when it comes to the domestic work. So it must be, compensated. But that was only for the compensation purposes that we have seen, where the Supreme Court have laid down the guidelines for the compensation of the female force or the workforce. Then there is the safety, mobility and the child care constraints as well when it comes to the women, because ultimately these constraints, they actually keep the women out of the paid work. And that is one of the cause why we have the lesser number of female participation in the workforce. And also when it comes to the governance, we have weak school to work bridges. All right, we do not have the formal education which actually prepares us for the formal job criteria. Also, when it comes to the apprenticeship and the formal hiring incentive, they remain underused nationally, and these are the conditions or these are the reasons why we have the Gen Z workforce participation that is quite less. Now coming to the next news that we have for today, it is over here, that is the maturing approach. It is about India that needs to use the market access in the UK, and this pertains to India and UK CETA. Now this is quite important because ultimately over here it is about that can India convert the tariff-free market access that we have into the actual market share, or will the history like we have with the ASEAN, so that will repeat itself, because ultimately we have signed a very important free trade agreement with the UK or Britain. Now this is quite important because when it comes to CETA, it offers duty-free access to or on 99% of the India's export that will be there for UK. Now this covers nearly the entire value of the bilateral trade that is there among India and UK. Now also this is quite important because India had protected the sensitive dairy market, and ultimately that we have done with respect to the all of the free trade agreements that we have signed, even with the New Zealand FTA. Despite that dairy is, a big or it is being a big UK and NZ or New Zealand export interest. Also, this is very important because ultimately when it comes to UK, so it accounts for nearly about 3% of India's merchandise exports and nearly about 1% of the imports that we do from the UK. So India runs a total merchandise trade surplus when it comes to UK, and this may benefit India's exporters as well. But at the same time, this is quite important to note over here that this is, or there is a contrast that exists. And this contrast is where this editorial, it actually compares this with the deficit that have widened. Now, this deficit have widened with the India and the ASEAN trade, and ultimately the trade deficit that we had with ASEAN, that was $10 billion in 2017. Now, this has grown to $44 billion in 2023, and also this is because there is the underutilization of the FTA or the free trade agreement. So therefore, this is quite important that when it comes to the CETA or any of the free trade agreements that had been signed, so they must be utilized properly so that ultimately we reap the benefits that are there. Also, when it comes to India and UK, we have the double contribution convention which had been signed, and ultimately this will benefit the Indian IT professional services firms on the UK social security payments as well. Now, over here, this is quite important because when it comes to free trade agreements or any of the trade agreements which are there that pertains to the economic regime, and here this is quite important because the MSMEs, they may struggle with the UK SPS, or there are the phytosanitary and the sanitary tariffs which are laid. Also, there are the technical and the sustainability standards which are laid. Basically, these are the non-tariff barriers that we are talking about. So they are not covered by any of the FTAs. They are non-tariff barriers, and when it comes to non-tariff barriers, they become one of the major barrier when it comes to the trade between any of the countries. So this is quite important because ultimately, even though we have the tariffs which had been reduced for 99% of the commodities which are there, but then there could be the various barriers that could be laid down through the NTB or the non-tariff barriers, and ultimately they are the real hurdles that we talk about when it comes to the trade between any of the nation. Alright, there is also the political implication that you can see where the UK steel safeguard quotas are there. Now, they have surfaced as the pre-implementation friction point, and this shows that non-tariff levers persist even in the comprehensive pacts which had been signed related to the agreement or related to the trade between the nations. Now, there is also environmental concern where India's carbon-intensive exports, it may face the growing exposure, as we have the UK or the EU style climate linked trade regulations which actually tightens. So we have seen in the case of the EU or the European Union that there is the CBAM. Alright, so ultimately there is the climate linked factors as well that have to be taken into consideration when it comes to such kind of free trade agreements which are signed. Now, coming to the next important news that we have, it is Centre has to align what it says on the delimitation with what is written in the bill. And there is also another news that actually pertains that the opposition, it wants to have a kind of hello and good morning. Alright, so opposition also wants to have a kind of dialogue on the NEET and also over the delimitation bill as well. Now, we know that this delimitation bill or 131st Constitutional Amendment Bill, it was actually first, it was brought or it was entered into the Lok Sabha in April 2026, where this was basically, it was, entered, or you can say it was tabled in the Parliament, and that was because so that the Lok Sabha seat, it could be increased as per the population of the country. Now, over here, there has to be a maximum, or the proposal was to raise the seats to maximum of 850 seats. And also, this proposed that there will be delimitation of the seats on the basis of the 2011 census. Now, this is quite important because ultimately there was no waiting for the 2027 census to be conducted. And here, this bill actually proposed that the delimitation exercise must be done in accordance with the 2011 census itself. Now, because the BJP or the ruling NDA, it does not have the required majority, that is 2/3 of the majority, and that is why this bill actually, when it got tabled into the Parliament, it actually got defeated. Now, this is quite important because we have over here Article 81 and 82. Now, they guarantee the current seat shares which are there in the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha as well. And ultimately, over here, we have the seat shares which had been frozen by the or the delimitation had been frozen as per the 1971 census. But this freeze is only up to 2026. So ultimately, this freeze will lapse after the first census which will be conducted after 2026. So basically, when it comes to the census, all right, so the census had to be the last census had to be conducted in 2021. So when it comes to the the defreezing, or you can say when it comes to the delimitation, that had to be conducted after or post 2031. All right, but now because the census got delayed, now we are talking about the census now that is being conducted in 2026, and the census data will be released in 2027. So now this the complete the freeze, it will lapse after the census 2027 that we are talking about. So over here we have seen that there had been the 2 presidents where the freeze was extended for 25 years. Now when it comes to 1976, through the 42nd Amendment Act, it was the seats were frozen until 2001, and then again in 2001 the seats were frozen till 2025. So there were 2 of the freeze or the extensions that were given. But at the same time, when it comes to the current government that is there in the center, it seems that there will be no freeze that will be implemented. And also this is quite important that ultimately through this act, all right, through 131st Constitutional Amendment Bill and the delimitation bill, actually over here the major proposal was so that the 1/3 of the Lok Sabha seats, they could be reserved, or they could be, the reservation for the women for the 1/3 of the seats in the Lok Sabha could be provided. So again, this is again tied to the next delimitation that will be conducted, and also this is quite important because if there had been the reintroduction of the 131st Constitutional Amendment Bill, so again that will be for the women reservation as well, and this will be for the delimitation also. Now the major concern over here is about the southern states, because ultimately when it comes to the complete delimitation exercise, the southern states, they may lose their percentage of the share that is there, or the seats that are there in the Lok Sabha. And Karan, good morning. Now over here, when it comes to the next set of the news that we have, it is the 2 news, and this is about between power and principle. This is about the Waqf board and the recent Kerala High Court ruling, and also there is another of the article that you can see. It is about Madhya Pradesh cabinet which have approved the draft UCC. Now this is quite important because both of these news, they pertains to the personal laws. All right, and there is the flashpoint that we are talking about, whether it is Waqf, whether it is the UCC, or even the coalition politics. Now this particular issue, it actually raises a very important question, and that is when we have the personal laws. So the personal laws reform, it meets the coalition arithmetic. So over here, does the principle it survive, or is the governance is always a series of the negotiated compromises that we see? And that is a very important question that you can see when it relates to the personal laws in India. Now over here, this is quite important because the Kerala High Court have recently frozen the state Waqf board functioning. Now this is because it has violated the Waqf Amendment Act that was passed in 2025, which have mandated that there should be 2 non-Muslims and 1 Shia member. Basically, they are missing into the composition, and that is why the High Court have frozen the state's Waqf board functioning. Now there is also the IUML, that is a UDF coalition partner. They have simultaneously that is a petitioner against the same act in the Supreme Court, and this is a contradiction when it comes to the coalition politics. Also, there is the UCC that had been cleared by the Madhya Pradesh cabinet, and over here it bans polygamy, it also bans the nikah halala, and even mandates that there should be registration of the live-in relationship. But ultimately, this UCC actually exempts the scheduled tribes as well. So this is quite important because when it comes to the draft UCC of Madhya Pradesh, so it actually removes the term illegitimate from the law. And ultimately, children, they are from any union, they will have the equal inheritance right. All right, this is quite important because this is what we will see in Madhya Pradesh, the UCC, or the draft UCC that is there. So it has removed the term illegitimate, and then also when it comes to the UCC, it exempts the scheduled tribes under the Article 342, also prohibits polygamy, also prohibits verbal divorce, that is triple talaq, and even prohibits nikah halala. And there would be mandatory registration for the marriages and the live-in relationships as well. So over here, there is a debate that I have, time and again, when I have taken the session for the UCC or the Uniform Civil Code, I have already, said And this debate is whether the Uniform Civil Code is uniform in itself or not. Because obviously when it comes to uniform, so Uniform Civil Code means that it should be applied to all the civilian population that is there. And all the laws which are there, they must be, they must be uniform. But at the same time, we have two of the, the different classes which had been, constructed. And these two classes that I'm talking about is the general population and the tribal population or the scheduled tribes. Now, when it comes to general population, they will be, guided by the Uniform Civil Code. But when it comes to the scheduled tribe, they had been provided the protection under the Article 342 that is related to their customary laws. And ultimately, this is quite important to note over here as well. Now, this is quite important because ultimately when it comes to the complete issue, so there is a coalition government like we have UDF, IUML, and they have to or they must balance their ideological consistency with the collective cabinet responsibility that is there. Now, this is quite important because ultimately where it comes to the coalition politics, so we know that the complete dimension is quite, you can say, critical because the live-in relationship clause clauses violate the right to privacy established under the Puttaswamy judgment. Yes, that's true. But again, when it comes to live-in relationship, so Supreme Court have also, laid down, you can say the similar kind of arrangement when it comes to live-in relationship for the purpose of inheritance as well and for the purposes of maintenance as well. So this aligns with those judgments as well. All right, because ultimately when it comes to providing the maintenance, when it comes to, when it comes to proving this in the courts, that all right, you had been in a live-in relationship. So there has to be a certain kind of certification or registration that has to be there. So again, yes, it actually violates, it does not violate the right to privacy because ultimately if there is someone who is in the live-in relationship, so ultimately they are only getting certified. All right, that is not a publication that they are doing in the public. So again, this does not directly violate it, but yes, you can say there are the concerns which had been raised. Now, over here, this is quite important because ultimately we have seen that when it comes to the coalition politics, so they are very critical. And there are certain ideological differences which actually exist between the parties, whether it is about the Waqf, it is about the liquor tax or the PM Shri Yojana as well. Now, they also show the similar kind of the pattern where we have the different coalition partners, but their ideological differences are there. But at the same time, they have to balance their ideological consistency so that there could be the cabinet responsibility that could be maintained or endured in the parliament or the state legislature as well. When it comes to the UCC's tribal exemption, so this is quite important because ultimately there are Article 342 and 366 which are there, where the state is balancing the uniformity that is there in the Uniform Civil Code with the constitutional protection that had been provided for the distinct customary law for the tribal people as well. Now, over here, this also raises the ethical question, and that is that should a party litigate against a law in the Supreme Court while implementing it in the government? Because in the government, we have the IUML that is the part of the coalition of the, the party that is there ruling in the Kerala. But at the same time, we have IUML that is basically litigating against the law, where the government is actually, it is implementing the law. So this actually tests the good faith federal governance versus the political opportunism that is there. Now, this is quite important because this is the ethical perspective that we are talking about. Now, coming to the next news that we have, it is the E20 transition fuel for debate. Now, we know when it comes to E20, this had been in the news for the past several days, and there are certain apprehensions about the E20 transition as well. Now, when it comes to the 20% ethanol that had been blended with the petrol, this is what we term as E20 petrol, and over here it became the default fuel nationwide right from April 2025. Now, this is where it is 5 years ahead of the original target that was there for 2030. Now, the goal over here is basically the energy security, where we have to cut the import dependence for the crude oil, because ultimately we know that for India, we are basically importing nearly about 85 to 90% of the crude oil from the foreign nations. Now, this is quite important because ultimately this will, reduce, or it will reduce the import dependence that we have, and also this will support the sugarcane and the grain farmers, especially the maize farmers, because the E20 or the ethanol, it is basically prepared from the sugarcane, molasses, and also prepared from the corn or the maize. And also it will cut the vehicular emission as well, and that is the goal while implementing the E20. Also, all petrol vehicles which had been sold since 1st of April 2023, they had been officially E20 mandated or material compliant. Older vehicles, they are the ones which are basically reporting the problems right now in the country. Now, when it comes to ethanol, please remember that it is hygroscopic. Hygroscopic means that it actually absorbs the moisture which is there. And when we have the water, if it contaminates, like for example, we have the monsoon season that is going on right now. So there are the fuel storage, tanks which are there in the petroleum or the petrol pumps. Now what happens is, if there is any water contamination in the underground fuel station tanks, that will cause the phase separation of the petrol and the ethanol. And that will damage the fuel pumps, and it will also damage the injectors as well. Also, when it comes to the ARAI, that is under the Ministry of Heavy Industries, it has studied the vehicular impact of E20s, but it has not made its finding public. Now, this is quite important because this pertains to transparency, where the transparency must be maintained and the public have the right to know that is there. Now, over here, this is very important because the data vacuum, it actually is fueling the speculation in the market, and thereby this is quite important. Now, over here, why we have the fuel separation or the phase separation process? So what happens is that when we have the tank moisture, which is greater than 0.5%, and there is E20 fuel that is there in the tank. So what happens over here is that ethanol, it chemically binds with the water. And after binding with the water, it actually separates from the petroleum. Now, we have the moisture or the mixture which separates from the petroleum, and this sinks to the bottom of the tank. And whenever there is the ignition, so this ignition will draw the pure water or the ethanol, which actually is basically destroying the engine that is there. Good morning, Avi. Even sugarcane is a highly water intensive crop. Yes, that's true. Alright, so over here, when it comes to the complete perspective, you can see that there is the repair shop business that will boom. Alright, so this is where we have the, the problem with the engines, problem with the, vehicles, and ultimately we have the repair engine or repair shops business that will boom. And this is again where we have most of the informal economy that is situated. At the same time, the consumer, they are basically bearing the unplanned maintenance cost. So this is where we have the hidden transition cost that we can talk about when it comes to implementation of E20. Even ethanol blending cuts the net emission. So there is a positive impact on the environment, and there is import dependence as well when it comes to the petroleum or when it comes to the crude oil. But when it comes to the real world fuel economy, so there is the loss of 3 to 5%, partly that actually offset the efficiency gains when it comes to the implementation of E20 in the country. And there is the absence of the transparent ARAI data, which actually undermines the consumer trust, which actually undermines the public trust as well. And there is a communication gap across the refiners, OMC, manufacturer, dealers. That is the core failure, and it is not the actual fuel itself that we are talking about. Now, coming to the next news, that is again in the editorial, and this is about Vikram 1. And we know that when it comes to Vikram 1, we have the Sky Route that have actually launched the Vikram 1 rocket, and that has proven that there is the engineering competence that we have in the country when it comes to the private players, when it comes to the space technology. And over here, this is not just about the private space. It is about that can the India's private space sector, it can now prove the commercial viability as well. We have the technology, we have the capability, we have the competence. And thereby, this is quite important when it comes to Vikram 1, because it is the first Indian private sector rocket that have reached the orbit on 18th of July 2026. And over here, this is quite important because now India is the third nation or the country after US and China, where we have the private industry that have reached the orbit through its own rocket launch vehicle. Now, this is quite important because here this complete Vikram 1 was manufactured using the 3D printed engine that have cut the mass or the components and the lead time as well to nearly 80% as compared to the conventional manufacturing that happens in ISRO. And also over here it uses the carbon fiber composite airframe. Alright, so ultimately the carbon fiber composite airframe, it provides it with the more strength. There is 5 times of the strength durability when it comes to the composition, and this is also lightweight. Alright, when it comes to the carbon fiber composite, this is lightweight, so the more of the mass it can be added to the propellant or to the the payload as well. And that is why this is quite important and very you can say very advanced technology that had been used for manufacturing of Vikram 1. Alright. Now over here there is the complete video that you can find in the video section as well about Vikram 1, its complete technology as well, where I have explained everything in detail. But at the same time this is quite important because here India actually lacks the Dedicated Space Activities Act. We have opened up the complete sector, the space sector, for the private private companies, and we have actually established the in-space as well, which actually regulates the private entry or the orbital launch as well. But at the same time there is no Dedicated Space Activities Act, and here the liability is basically governed by the policy, contract and the existing law. Now this actually creates a long-term regulatory uncertainty for the investors, where India must be looking forward to. Alright, so the government, it must pass a Space Activities Act as soon as possible, so that all the liabilities, they can be actually codified. Then there is also Vikram 1's cab service model. Basically this is where the customer, it picks the orbit and the schedule. So this is against the SpaceX or the Rocket Lab and scaling Chinese rivals as well. Now there is repeatability and the cost, and not one launch that will actually decide the complete success, and let's see what happens in the future related to the private launch vehicles as well. Then there is the governance factor, where it is the state monopoly, where we had only ISRO that was basically into the space research. Now it is being repositioned, and ultimately we are moving towards the research and development, towards the deep space missions when it comes to the ISRO. So ISRO's focus has changed now. Now ISRO will be moving towards more of the research and development, deep space operations and the missions, while we have the in-space. So in-space will enable the private commercial launch, and ultimately that will basically where we have the market creation exercise that will be happening in the future. So again, this is important for India, where we have a private launch vehicle that have established its competence in the space market. Now coming to the next news that we have, it is the second phase of the US-Iran war. Now this is quite important because ultimately we have seen that there have been fresh escalations when it comes to the West Asia, and both the nations, whether it is US or whether it is Iran, they have launched the strikes against each other. Now this is quite important because ultimately there had been a ceasefire in June 2026, and here there had been 60-day off the free passage arrangement that had collapsed. The hostilities, they have resumed after the Iran have struck the ships including India-bound LNG carrier Al-Rakayat. There is also US which have rejected the Iran-Oman's proposed voluntary transit toll as well. So there is the US have actually rejected the proposal, and here it had been modeled on Malacca, Singapore State's Aids to Navigation Fund. So there is already the Aids to Navigation Fund that is there in Malacca, Singapore States, and the same was proposed by Iran and Oman, which had been rejected by US in the favor of the pre-war status quo, that there should be no levying of any of the cost when it comes to transition of the ships into the region. It can carry up to 350 kg, yes, that's true. Now this is quite important because when it comes to both the states, both the states are important, both the choke points are important, whether it is Strait of Hormuz, whether it is Malacca Strait, and they had been classified as the states used for the international navigation under the UNCLOS link conventions as well. So here there has to be no fees which had to be levied on the transit passage. Now here again when it comes to Iran, so it has diversified its pressure points. Till now we were seeing that Iran was basically focused upon Strait of Hormuz, and now Iran have said that the major attacks that will happen, so that will be in the ship-to-ship transfers when it comes to Fujairah, and also it is pushing Houthis. so that it can, or the Houthis, they can hit the Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline through the Red Sea route as well. So over here, when it comes to the pressurization, now we are seeing that it is not only the Strait of Hormuz, but also the Bab al-Mandeb or the Red Sea route that is under the crisis. So again, when it comes to the complete shipping of the oil and the LNG, that majorly happens for the Gulf nation, for the Middle East, through these two of the routes, whether it is Red Sea route or it is the Strait of Hormuz route. So again, there is a crisis that is looming, and let's see where this actually heads to in the future. Now, this is quite important because ultimately this pertains to the economic scenario where this is about the global energy security that is being directly exposed. We have the Hormuz, which remains the most critical oil and gas choke point, and shipping insurance costs, they are also rising in the because of the ongoing crisis, and that is also a leading indicator where we must watch how the shipping industry will be impacted by the complete scenario. There is also the GCC states where we have Kuwait, Jordan and Bahrain. They are basically caught between the US alliance commitments which are there, and even the geographical proximity to the Iranian retaliation. We have seen that there had been a recent attack on the Jordan US air bases, and that have led to the death of two of the American soldier as well, and there is one who is actually missing. There is also India that has the direct stakes, and ultimately we have the Indian seafarer who have died aboard a stuck vessel, and there is the India-bound LNG cargo that had been targeted. So this is about India's maritime security. It is about India's energy security as well, and that is why this news becomes quite important. Now, the next news is about where it is the editorial much more than the Melbourne meets Modi. So over here we have known that Prime Minister Modi, he have visited Australia, and ultimately this have led to a new joint declaration on the defense and security cooperation. And also there is the cyber critical technologies and the supply chain partnership that had been struck between India and Australia. Also, there is a maritime security collaboration roadmap which had been announced for the Indian Ocean. Australia will enable the uranium exports to India for the peaceful purposes as well. Now, the talks between India and Australia that was going on for the uranium import, but at the same time, there were certain fear when it comes to the liability that was actually as per the CLNDA Act. But now, when we have the Shanti Act, this proposal have moved forward, and ultimately will be able to source the uranium import from Australia as well. Now, there are the 8 Australian universities, including UNSW, which are opening the Indian campuses, and UNSW's India campus, it will be the highest ranked foreign university campus that will be there in India. So this is a news for us. Now, this is quite important because ultimately it pertains to the political regime where we have both the nations, they seek the reliable partners amid the global uncertainty that is there, and this is the where we have the strength that merges. We have the complementary strength where Australia is basically strengthened in energy, mining and education. And then when it comes to India, so India is basically a strong manufacturing hub, or you can say we have pushed for the Atmanirbhar Bharat or the Make in India initiative, where India can provide a reliable market and the source for the Australia as well. So this is where we are talking about the relationship which had been anchored structurally, where there are the certain strengths which are there with Australia. They have the new technologies related to energy, mining and education, and for the manufacturing hub, we have the largest workforce in the country. Or we can say what we were talking about the first news that we discussed, that is about the workforce. So we have the demographic dividend, and they have the technology, they have the sources, they have the resources, and that is why this could be where there is the relationship that had been entered in structurally. Then there is the diversified cooperation when it comes to the economic scenario, where we are talking about the hyperscaler data center investment. There is the investment in the education, in the uranium trade as well, and that will reduce the dependence on any single level or leader chemistry. And also we have Indian diaspora that is there in Australia. Now, this is one of the greatest or the fastest growing community in Australia, and here we can see that there could be the people-to-people driver that will be independent of the governments or the government cycle that will boost the ties between Australia and India in the future. Now over here, when it comes to your prelims, these are certain news that you must keep in mind. And again, these are certain facts that you should keep in mind related to your prelims. The first one is about EGR or electronics gold receipt. Now over here, NSE have launched the EGRs in May 2026. But at the same time, BSE was the first exchange to launch the EGR trading in October 2022. Now, this is where we have the purity standards of 999 and 995 which are traded, and there is T+1 settlement as well. Then comes Sir Ghafil Sober. He is, was the best Indian, all-rounder, and also he has held the triple century record where it is 365 against Pakistan in 1958, and that was for 36 years. Now, he has passed away at the age of 89. Then we have FIFA World Cup final that will be there today, and it is between Spain and Argentina. The complete FIFA World Cup, it was hosted across US, Canada and Mexico, and the final will be played at MetLife Stadium that is there in East Rutherford in New York or near New York. Now there is also Taj Mahal case where it is basically about the report of the ASI in 2017. Now, Taj Mahal is the 17th century tomb, and there is a Petra Dura technology which actually did not existed pre-medieval time period, where the Allahabad High Court have issued the fresh notices in 2026 on a temple claim that had been made related to Taj Mahal. Then also there is another news that is about Canada study permit data, where India's share of the international students in Canada, it has fell down from 41.2% that it was there in 2022 to 24.6% in 2025. And when it comes to the Canada's 26-28 immigration level plans, they have halved the study permit cap as well. There's also Karnataka medical seats, where now the state with the highest number of the medical seats in India is Karnataka, where it has 15,395 seats as compared to or across the 75 colleges that are there. Also, there is another term that you can see, and that is embodied AI and neuromorphic AI. Now, you can understand embodied AI as like something that is all over the body. That is where it is the intelligence that lives. All right. So, it is attributed, or you can say it is distributed across the brain body environment, and that is embodied AI. Then there is neuromorphic AI. Neuromorphic is basically you can say how the processor is built. That is basically about spiking the neural networks that are there, and that is what the neuromorphic AI is. And then there is Vande Mataram Bill 2026, which will amend the Prevention of Insults to National Honor Act of 1971 to criminalize the insult to the national song on the par with the national anthem. Here the maximum jail term, it could be 3 years as per the bill that is there. So these are the important articles that you will see in our today's The Hindu. Now comes the questions. Let's see what are the important questions that could be asked in your prelims examination. The first one is, with reference to the clause, consider the following statement. First, the regime of the transit passage applies to states used for international navigation, and coastal states cannot suspend the passage for the security reason. Second, under the innocent passage, a coastal state has a right to temporarily suspend the passage of foreign vessels in specified areas of its territorial sea if such suspension is essential for the protection of its security. Then, the coastal states are legally permitted to levy compulsory transit tolls on the foreign merchant vessels exercising the right of transit passage through the international states. Which of the statements given above is correct? Right, third one is incorrect, and we have 1 and 2 which are correct, and thereby the answer will be A, that is 1 and 2 only. That's true. Now, consider following statements regarding the ethanol blended petrol or EBP program in India. The first one is, all petrol run vehicles sold in India since April 1, 2023 are chemically engineered to be compatible with ethanol blended petrol or E20. Alright, Then we have ethanol has a higher energy density than pure petrol, which leads to a corresponding increase in a vehicle's fuel efficiency as the blend percentage rises. Then phase separation in ethanol blended fuel occurs when water contamination leads to the unbinding of ethanol from petrol, causing a water ethanol mixture to settle at the bottom. So what will be the correct answer here? I'm getting C. Yes, C is right one because the second statement is incorrect. We have first and third which are true. Now coming to the next question that we have, it is with a reference to the private sector space technology in India. Consider the following matching pairs: Skyroot Aerospace Vikram 1 orbital rocket with a 3D printed liquid engine injector. Then Agnikul Cosmos Agniban sorted vehicle with the world's first single-piece 3D printed semi-cryogenic engine. And then in space, single window autonomous nodal agency under the Department of Space to authorize and regulate the private space activities. Which of the pairs are matched correctly? Let's see what will be the right answer. Yes, Apex, that's true. All had been matched correctly. So that is D is the correct answer. Now coming to the next question that we have, which of the following constitutional provisions offer protection or forms the basis of the tribal exemptions from standardized civil laws in India? We have Article 342 of the Constitution, then we have 5th and 6th schedules of the Constitution and Part 21 of the Constitution. So again, which select the correct answer using the code given below. Alright Pradeep, yes, I'm sorry that I forgot to upload the PDF. They will be uploaded today itself. Alright, do not worry. Alright Pradeep. Alright, so what is the correct answer here? We have another D, that is all are true. That is again right. Then we have next question, that is with reference to the composition of Lok Sabha and the process of delimitation. Consider the following statements. The first one is the state-wise allocation of the seats in the Lok Sabha is currently frozen on the basis of 1971 census to protect representation for the states that successfully stabilize population growth. Then the internal boundaries of constituencies within individual states are currently redrawn on the basis of population figures of 2001 census. Then the constitutional freeze on state-wise seat allocation is set to expire upon the publication of first census data after the year 2026. So again, we have D, that is all the statements are true here as well. That's true. Now for the mains, you can practice these questions. First, the unfreezing of Lok Sabha seat allocations post 2026 presents a core conflict between raw mathematical democracy and federal stability. Critically examine this statement and evaluate the pro rata seat expansion model as a potential compromise. Alright. Then we have examined the strategic and economic significance of India-UK CETA and the DCC for India's services and labor-intensive export sectors. Then we have another question that you can try for your ethics as well, and that is states mandated registration of live-in relationship under the recent UCC draft raises critical questions about personal liberty, privacy, and the state enforced morality. Discuss this statement in light of the constitutional right to privacy and relevant judicial precedents. And then we have detailed the technical and mechanical challenges associated with the rapid rollout of E20 fuel in India, suggest policy measures to balance national energy security goals with the vehicle compatibility and consumer protection. So these are the Tanmoy, hello, and Jai Hind, political science, hi. So these are the questions that you can try for your mains examination as well. And it is very important to note that we have the GS Foundation batch, that is Resolution P2I batch, in which you can enroll. and you can use the code that is BRS Live, that will fetch you the maximum discount onto the platform. Alright, so that would be all in today's session. I hope that you have enjoyed the session, and if you have liked the session, please do not forget to leave the like for the video or the session, and even share the session with your friends who are preparing for the civil services so that they can also get benefited. So that would be all in today's session. Thank you very much guys for joining me over here. Thank you everyone who had been here. See you Apex and Reshma, thank you, and thank you everyone who have joined me today.